You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Fiona Davis, one of my all-time favorite authors and one of my all-time favorite guests on the show. Fiona, is this the fourth time that we've done this, I think?
I think it might be. Isn't that incredible? You've
That's
been
incredible.
At the very beginning.
I know, it's so much fun. I always look forward to this time of year because getting a new book from you is always exciting. I love everything that you're doing, and I've loved just getting to know you throughout this process and watching as your career has unfolded. And I'll tell you what, how does it feel knowing that you are the go-to person for the history of New York?
Oh, wow. I'd say the go-to person for the fictional history of New York. How's that?
That's I'll settle for that. Oh man. You are this week you have released when people are hearing this, we're recording this ahead of time, but when people are hearing this, your latest book, The Lyons of Fifth Avenue, is out. And I'll tell you what, I love this book, Fiona. You've done it again. It's such an amazing accomplishment.
Oh, thank you so much. It was just so much fun to research and write, and I'm just thrilled to have it out in the world.
Yeah. Let's bring some people up to speed if they're new to you or to the show and they haven't gone back and listened to all of the other appearances that when you've been on the show. What was it that brought you to writing? I know that you've had a career in theater and different things along the way, but what was it about writing that drew you in?
Yeah, I went to Columbia Journalism School and got a master's, and it just really taught me about storytelling and research and how to interview someone. And so while I worked as a journalist for a number of years, once I had a book idea, I think that background really helped me because it kind of put me ahead of the game, where, I knew how to craft a story. As for dialogue and scene setting, that was a whole other ballgame. But I think it just gave me a leg up.
With the history that you have in journalism and your educational background, 2020 has to just seem like a bizarre year.
It's been, very bizarre. But I almost feel like it's a golden time for journalists because their voices are more important now more than ever. And seeing the work that's being done and the stories that are being unearthed about what's going on, I find it really inspiring.
Yeah. Fiona, you also have worked as an editor in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a managing editor for a technical theater magazine.
When balancing your role as a writer with what you learned as an editor, do you feel like that helped you to be a stronger writer? Do you ever lean on that editor brain?
Definitely. I love editing. And when I'm writing a first draft, I find that's the hardest part of creating a story. And then editing, when you have something to play with, it's like sculpting and just shaping the words and hitting on the exact right sentence. I find that part of writing a lot of fun. And I think that does come from that journalist background.
Well, some writers talk about having to, when they're in the midst of drafting and they're kind of in the fever of the words coming and pouring out of them, they talk about having to turn off their internal editor or, kind of get out of their editor brain to get that draft done. Is that ever a something that you struggle with from, going back and forth from one role to the other, or is it sort of a symbiotic relationship to you?
Yeah, I like a strong separation as well. So when I'm doing the first draft, I don't go back and look at what I've written because that would just catch me up in a maelstrom of, editing and words and oh, it's not good enough. So when I do that first draft, I just fly through it without looking back. And I think that helps me finish the story because only once I've finished the whole thing, because they tend to be complicated with two timelines and an element of mystery. I need to see that general idea before I can start to shape it. So yeah, I definitely turn off the editor brain when I'm writing a fresh scene.
Does it excite you, Fiona, when you uncover some interesting historical tidbit about New York City or about wherever you happen to be looking, and then a story starts to form around that?
Yes, that's why I do this, I think, because I'll start researching the building. For example, the New York Public Library, I was looking through some old articles and suddenly found this amazing article about the superintendent who'd lived in the building in an apartment, a 7-room apartment in the building with his wife and children. And he was there for 30 years. And once I realized that a family lived in that library, and when it was built, it was the largest marble monument or the largest marble structure in America back in 1911. I knew I had my way in.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give Pro Writing Aid a try. Pro Writing Aid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. Pro Writing Aid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. Pro Writing Aid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. Pro Writing Aid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, over-dependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of Pro Writing Aid Premium. Pro Writing Aid. Check it out today. Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Novler, Novlr. That's novler.org.
That has to be fascinating. For me, growing up in a portion of the country where we are definitely spread out, and people really hold on to and value kind of their own place, their own land, and we're just very spread out in this part of the country, and as opposed to New York, where now we're talking what 8-9 million people, and that a lot of times people are stacked on top of each other in apartment buildings and things like that, because you have to have place for all of these people. That's a very different mindset when it comes to just the idea of being. And then you start thinking about these iconic places like the New York Public Library and people living there. Is New York a place that is more suited to where it's not that strange of an idea for a superintendent and his family to live on the premises there? Is New York the kind of place where that kind of thing can happen more so than anywhere else in the country, do you think?
That's a really good question. I know that even the smaller libraries had live-in superintendents, because back in the day you had to keep the furnace going with coal, and that's what they did. And so the superintendent at the New York Public Library, the main branch, he had a bigger job. It was really running the whole infrastructure. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Carnegie libraries that are around the country also have apartments for the supers, because when they were built, you needed someone to keep them warm.
I never thought of that. And also the part of the country where I live, that's not something we ever think about, is how are we going to keep this building warm 24 hours a day?
That is true.
So Fiona, people want to know, you come up with these great ideas, these iconic places. And, when I read a book of yours, I feel like I come away smarter because I know something that other people don't know. I know some of the history behind it, but then you insert these fantastic stories about people in the midst of this. And I come away smarter for knowing things that I didn't know, but I feel like I've connected with characters at the same time. How do you decide? Because in a place like New York, where there's got to be millions of just unique stories like this, but what makes a place jump out to you to begin with, that then you start kind of digging for the story? What is it about the place that jumps out at you?
I like places that seem to be one thing on the outside, but then are something else underneath. I think a building that surprises me with how its facade appears and then what's actually going on behind the scenes is what drives me. So, something like Grand Central Terminal, which is this transportation hub, the idea that there was a big art school inside it, and all these artists would show up every day to learn how to paint or do watercolor. I love that. And for the Barbizon Hotel for Women in the Dollhouse, it was this, very protective refuge for nice young ladies. But then there was all this crazy stuff going on in every floor, even back in the 50s. And so that's really fun to just bring the ghosts of these buildings to light is what I love to do.
I've been a dad for like 25 years now, so I love a good pun. The dad joke game gets stronger the older you are. But there's a great pun in the title, The Lyons of Fifth Avenue. Where did the Lyons family come from?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, they had a different name in an early edit. And then my agent and my editor came up with the title of the book, The Lyons of Fifth Avenue. And the minute we all agreed that was the best title, I thought, well, I have a friend whose last name is Lyons, and Lyons. And I thought, oh, that would be great, because then it refers to not only the building and the Lyons, but also this family that is the focal point of the story. And so I went and changed the name.
I love it. I love it. So you're looking at the New York Public Library. This place is intriguing to you. At what point did you discover the apartment and discover that there were people that were attached to this building?
Yeah, that was pretty early on. I think I was doing a deep search on the New York Times machine, which is the archives of the New York Times, and found this wonderful article about the super who was retiring and what his family was like. He had 3 children. His daughter was actually born in the library. It talked about how the kids would play baseball using books as bases in the reading room until they got caught. And so that was really the spark, where I thought, well, I'll create a family. It won't be that family because I want a family who I can have them do things and have things happen to. And so I created a fictional family where it's a wife and her husband and their 2 children, and they live in the library. And it's from the wife's point of view. And she's, surrounded by all this knowledge, but really feels stifled. She wants something more out of the world. And this is in 1913. And so she applies and gets into Columbia Journalism School, which had just opened. And her world is really cracked wide open.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you attended journalism school. Did you feel a kinship in this story when you discovered that little nugget of information?
Yeah, there's a wonderful book about the history of it. And it was just so interesting to see how much it had changed, especially for a woman going there. If you went there in 1912 or 1913, you were only 15% of the student population. And, while the men were told to go and do stories on, the latest murder trial or politics, women were told to go to charitable organizations and write about, orphans with tear-streaked cheeks. And so it was a very different experience. And then, of course, when I went, in fact, now the school is 75% women. And,
Wow.
and women are making decisions and running the place. And so it's just fun to see how it's changed and just how times have changed, which is why I love writing in 2 time periods.
Right. So we discovered that this building has a family that lives there. Tell me about Laura Lyons. She's kind of the protagonist of the story, and or at least of one of the stories, and ultimately both of the stories, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But what was it about Laura that intrigued you first, and how did you kind of envision, what her path was?
Yeah, she definitely came to me early on where I thought, I want to do it from the wife's point of view. The superintendent has all his business going on. She has these 2 young children she has to take care of. And like I said, she just feels really isolated. So I took it from there and thought, well, what if she's trying to do something? In 1911, there was something called the New Woman was the real trend. And women were really asking questions about what their roles were and what's the traditional role versus, what will fulfill them. And so all these things that we talked about in the 60s and 70s about things like birth control or women's rights or even free love were talked about down in Greenwich Village. It's something called the Heterodoxy Club, which really was this amazing women's group that was founded by a woman named Marie Jenny Howe, who was this feminist organizer and writer. And she would have luncheon meetings every 2 weeks above a restaurant on McDougal Street. And women would come and have these fierce debates and discussions about things like the right to vote and women's rights. And it attracted icons like Agnes DeMille and Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And so I love the idea that Laura, who is grown up in a very traditional family and is living the traditional family life, is suddenly thrust into this crazy new world where, people are talking about things that seem very shocking to her. And I love the fact that, we were talking about these things in the 60s and 70s, and even now that in a way, this discussion is still ongoing.
What's really interesting to me, Fiona, is that in time traveling back 100 years or just a little more than 100 years, how different the world was, while at the same time some of the same struggles are still kind of, front and center. I was raised by a mother who was very much a feminist in the deep South. And we talked about things. She modeled things for me that I just kind of took for granted until you start looking at the world around you and thinking, wow, well, we still have some work to do. But in kind of digging back 100 years or a little more, is it a culture shock to look at just how different the world was then?
Yeah, it really was. There's a character in my book who's modeled off this amazing woman named Josephine Baker, who was the first director of the New York City Bureau of Child Hygiene. And in the early 1900s, she really pioneered the idea of public health and health education. And so in the book, Laura stumbles upon her and what she's doing. And she's giving advice to a woman who lives in a tenement building and has, a dozen or so kids and is very poor and impoverished. And, they go over kind of what are the rules for raising children. And, she has to remind her, don't give your baby beer. and so, you think about how much we know now about health education and children's health. And so it's really interesting to bring those kind of things to light as to some of the myths that were kind of going on back then.
So we talked a little earlier about how you love to kind of build these books with dual narratives where we're living in the past, and then you juxtapose that with a modern character, and then how they intersect with this other story. What was the impetus for the second storyline in this book?
Yeah, so the second storyline is from the point of view of a character named Sadie, and she's a curator at the Berg Collection at the New York Public Library, which is kind of like a library within a library for rare books and manuscripts. And she's trying to put on an exhibit of rare books, but one of them goes missing. And so she's drawn into this series of book thefts that occurred 80 years ago, as well as a terrible tragedy that happened to the superintendent's family back then. And I picked 1993 because I knew I wanted it to center around book thefts. And the book theft I was modeling it on happened in 1994 at Columbia University's Butler Library. And I also thought the 90s were an interesting time period. I was around then here in New York, so I could access that fairly easily. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I settled.
When you still had CBGBs in the 90s also.
Yes. And there's a couple scenes there. Exactly.
I love it. What are some of the challenges with writing a character in modern time? I think 93 we can classify as modern times, as opposed to 1911, 1913. Is it difficult to switch, your writer brain, from a modern character's head to someone 100 years ago? Are there exercises that you do to kind of switch over into which character you're going to be portraying at the time?
Yeah, it is a little tricky. And what I do is usually in the modern time period, it's the way I normally talk. So the key is the dialogue, getting the dialogue to feel modern and a little older, but not stodgy. And so the modern section, it's, I can do that because that's the way I talk every day. And what I found is that for the older time periods, it's easier for me to kind of channel my parents, who are both English. And so they put words together in a different way that I think helps elevate the language very slightly, so that readers know they're in a different time period and people aren't using modern slang or anything. So I owe my parents thanks for that, because I really think just the English voice helps to bring that about.
Gotcha. Tell me about Book Row. What was this place, and kind of what is its role in the story?
Yeah, so Book Row was in New York City. It was on 4th Avenue between Union Square and Astor Place. And there were, I think, around 80 bookstores there for a number of decades. And that's where you went if you wanted to buy or sell books. And so because this is a book theft, there's, some of the characters end up down there trying to figure out where these books might have ended up that have been stolen. Now, of course, there's only one bookstore left. It's the Strand, or maybe there's a couple, but I know the Strand is still there, and kind of representing the ghosts of the former Book Row. But there's some wonderful black and white photos of it, of just books, out in stands, out on the sidewalk, and people browsing. And I wish I'd been around then to see it.
Fiona, we've talked in the past about how you look up information to try to find little tidbits about a building that might, bring about some interesting storyline or, turn or something like that. And some of the challenges with finding some interesting tidbits about a building. But the New York Public Library is a very public place. No pun intended in the name. But was this book easier to research and to get into, or because of its kind of uber public nature, was it harder to find things that people didn't know about?
You know what? I would say it was easier, because one of the things that happened was I was able to work in the Allen room in the library, and that's for writers with book contracts. And I could work in there, and if I needed a book, I could order it and it would end up on my bookshelf. And so I had books on the history of the construction of the library and easy access to that. And then on top of that, they also had all these archives from the superintendent's records back in 1912, 13. So I could go and look through the payroll and see letters that were sent to him and his replies and get a sense of what his job was. And so what it might have been like to have been his wife. So that was really wonderful. The librarians were an incredible help, to the point where early in an early draft, I had a dead body in the book. It's not there now, but I had a dead body. And I reached out to one of the librarians to say, if you had to hide a dead body in the library, where would you put it? And she wrote back right away with, oh, yeah, here's the location. And said she'd never gotten that question before. So it was a really wonderful experience writing about the library, because there is so much available.
Speaking of librarians, there are lots and lots of jokes about librarians, and they really get pigeonholed into this stereotypical kind of character. We think librarian, and you automatically get an image in your mind. Yet when we really, really need to know something, we all kind of have a librarian or someone like that we'll call on. They're one of those people that's fun to make fun of until you need them, and then they're the most important person in the world. What did you learn about librarians, and what might surprise people about this profession?
Yeah, my hero librarian, and who's kind of modeled in the book, is a woman named Jean Ashton, who, as I mentioned, was part of Butler Library when these thefts were going on. And it was in 1994, and a thief stole $1.8 million in rare books and manuscripts and letters over the course of 3 months. And I was able to interview Jean about that experience and what effect it had on the staff as they were trying to figure out what on earth is going on. How is he getting these things out? And the thief was eventually caught, and Jean Ashton testified before a judge during sentencing and asked for a harsher sentence. And she gave this very impassioned plea about, what he stole was not just X pages worth X, but a piece of Western history and culture, and that the loss would have just a dramatic impact on scholarly research. And she explained that libraries believe, like the public library, they believe in safekeeping the artifacts of the past, which can then be rediscovered by scholars as times change. So, for example, a document that might have had very little value 50 or 100 years ago, like, Virginia Woolf's diaries, which are women's diaries, written in Stationer's notebook in ink. They might not have been worth a lot a long time ago, but now they command really high prices because the ways of thinking have evolved over time. And Jean Ashton explained to the judge why these items were important. And he listened to her, and he granted a harsher sentence. And so to me, she's a true literary hero. And in fact, in 2002, a new law was added that gave harsher sentences if you stole something from a library or a museum. And so she really changed things. And so, to me, she is the true hero of the book.
Absolutely. Fiona, we were talking before we started recording about the strangeness that is 2020 and the pandemic that we're, still in the midst of, and what that means for a lot of people. And I've been asking some authors lately how this has affected them, because authors are typically, a group of people that spend a lot of time indoors and by themselves, and until it kind of becomes book tour time, a lot of writers' time is spent alone and, with a computer or with a notebook or whatever. But I've gotten some interesting insight from how this has affected people's mindset and well-being and things like that. How are you coping, with 2020? And of course, you've got a new book out, but before that, kind of how has this affected your life?
Yeah, I do work from home, which helps so much. And I do, wake up and write. So that hasn't changed a lot. I think it's the interaction with other people that I miss very much. And I have a pod of close friends and my boyfriend, and so there is some, but I think I miss the surprises of going to a play and getting inspired by, a piece of dialogue, or just walking down the street and seeing, a tourist who strikes me. That's what's missing right now. And it's those bursts of inspiration that kind of feed you as you're writing a long 90,000 word story. And so I look forward to the time when they come back. But in the meantime, yeah, I'm writing. I'm doing a lot of virtual events, which are amazing because I can reach so many people and interact with so many readers. So I'm trying to be grateful for what I can do here.
I was talking with Brad Thor a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about that very thing. And what was interesting was where now he would be out on book tour, going all over the country and visiting bookstores. A lot of that has been switched to virtual meetings and virtual appearances. And one interesting thing about that is he can do multiple of those per day, so he can potentially, and I'm kind of doing air quotes here, potentially reach more people. But he's also not getting that person to person interaction that you would get. So there seem to be some benefits, but as always, with trade-offs. I'll be interested to see next year kind of what this looks like and how people have adjusted, and maybe how reader expectations have adjusted. I think it has the potential to for some interesting things to come out of it. We'll just put it that way.
I agree. I think so. And on that note, what I miss is the signings where you have, a few moments with a reader where you can, they can share something with you that's important. And just that personal connection, I think, is so valuable. And I'll be eager next year to get back to that.
Absolutely. Well, 2020 also is the 125th anniversary of the New York Public Library. Did I get that right?
I think so. Yes.
That's really cool that a book like this comes out to coincide with that. Was that on purpose?
No. I just completely, that just was pure luck. Because I didn't read about that or hear about it, because I started the book a couple of years ago at this point. And so it wasn't in discussion. So yeah, when I heard that, I was so excited, and we're doing a big launch day event. It will have passed, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it online by the time this goes live. And I'm doing a number of events where I'll be talking about the book in the library, which can all be found on my website. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well, tell people what that website is where they can find you.
Sure. It's FionaDavis.net.
.net. Okay. We'll be sure to put links to that in the show notes where everyone can find you. And we'll obviously put a link to the Lyons of Fifth Avenue, where you can get it in hardcover or audiobook or Kindle edition, however you consume books. It'll be available to you. Fiona, this is always fun catching up, and I love the new book. We're going to send everyone to get their copy of it. thank you for joining me again today.
Oh, thank you. And thank you again. It means so much what you do. And I look forward to our talks every year. So thank you very much.
And we'll cut it right there. That was amazing as usual. Thank you, Fiona.
Oh, such great questions. I love it. It kind of primes me for when I have to do more of these next week. It kind of sets my head in the right spot. So thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you. And I'll send you a link when we post it, and we'll promote it everywhere.
Great. And best of luck with everything. I hope you have a wonderful summer.
You too. Thank you, Fiona. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.